These are the 5 life lessons to conquer in your 20s so that you can be happy and thriving in your 30s. Credentials: I built and achieved my dream life in my 20s, only to tear it down shortly after I turned 30. Now I'm living a life that is fulfilled, aligned, full of joy and success in my 30s. And these are the lessons that got me to where I am today. The biggest lesson that we're all struggling with in our early 20s is, who am I? What do I want? This is the time in your life that you're figuring out what career you want. What are your actual hobbies and interests, right? Like, you've probably left your high school friends behind. Maybe you went away to college. Maybe you're deciding if you want to live in a new city or not. And you're trying to figure out who you actually are and what you actually want. Because up until this point, through your childhood and teen years, everything in your life was determined by your zip code, right? The home that you were born into, the town you were born into, the people that you were forced to be in proximity with, right? These were not necessarily things that you chose for yourself. And now you're at a crossroads where you get to choose new things. So the first kind of boss level of your 20s is deciding, what do I actually want? My best advice for getting through this phase is to try everything. But when I was in college, I switched my majors 3 times. I took on 2 minors. I started out in college as a social work major. I ended up actually graduating with a psychology degree so that I could smush in all of my pre-med coursework into there and still maintain my credits for everything. I minored in biology and Spanish. I studied abroad in Mexico. I did an internship in social work. I had a part-time job that I was able to use my psychology degree for. And I really felt like neither of them were 1,000% aligned with me. And it wasn't until I studied abroad in Mexico, shadowing doctors, that it was like, yes, medicine, healthcare, let's fucking go. But had I not been like throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying a million different things, I never would have gotten there. So try everything. Don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid of starting over, adding on a semester, changing your major, doing things that seem harder. Like, one of my favorite classes and most impactful professors was my chemistry teacher. And I was terrified to take chemistry. I don't know why. I actually loved it in high school too. But for some reason I had in my head that like science would be too hard for me. And it turns out I'm actually really good at it. So try new things. Next, we have wrestling with the struggle of, who are my friends and family? Now, again, up until this point in your life, you have been into forced friendships based on proximity, and your family has been the family you're born into. You have not yet had the experience of chosen family, most likely. Part of this time period that's very painful is understanding the shortcomings of your current friends and family. When you move out of your childhood home, sometimes it's the first time that people are recognizing how truly dysfunctional things actually were. What was a good thing, what was a bad thing, what's normal, what's abnormal, what's something that you would choose to repeat or not repeat in your life if you were to have your own. And same thing with your friends, realizing that maybe your high school and even college friends perhaps did not always have your best interest at heart. Maybe they weren't always good friends to you. That's a very hard lesson to learn as well. For me, this shocking realization came when my sister died. I was 23, but I kept one core group of friends through my church growing up. My parents were very, very religious, so I always had the same group of friends from elementary school through college. We did drift apart a little bit in college, but mostly when I got my second degree in nursing, because I was very, very busy with my accelerated program and I was living in a different state. And shortly after nursing school, my sister passed away, and all of those friends that had been my best friends, my ride or dies, people that I felt were extremely close to me, or at least I perceived that way, from kindergarten through literally up until that year, not a single one of them called me, texted me, messaged me on Facebook or anything. So this is, again, a very hard thing to learn in your 20s. Like, you have to choose your friends and set down boundaries with people who are not actually good friends to you, and be willing to let bad friendships go. If your family is unhealthy for you, this is the time in life when people start to decide about what kind of boundaries they're going to set down. Are they going to have hard conversations with their family? Are they going to go to therapy? Are you going to cut them out entirely? Or are you just going to keep them at arm's length? This is when you're essentially curating your friendships and your chosen family. This next phase I call the people are people phase. This is when you get a little bit older. You've gone through the shock or the experience of deciding who your friends and family are going to be. Perhaps you've gotten better at choosing healthy friendships. You've created healthy boundaries or had difficult conversations with your family. And now you're getting a little bit older. Your frontal lobe finishes developing around 25 years old, right? And now we are depersonalizing things. We're no longer so shocked and appalled by our people around us, our experiences in childhood. We are realizing that our parents are just humans. Maybe the people who bullied you in high school are also just humans. We are seeing people around us as part of their own story, as their own universe, and we're starting to depersonalize any harm that others have caused us, realizing that it might necessarily not have been intentional. In fact, it usually is not, and kind of decentering ourselves from the story. We are no longer the center of the entire universe, even though we are the center of our own universe. This is a really important life lesson in order to start to just forgive and move on and take away some of the pain from experiences that have happened to you. And it's really important for maturing, healing, and moving forward with grace into the next decade of your life. This was one of my favorite lessons of my 20s, overcoming my fear of being perceived. I had grown up being such a crippling people pleaser. I'd always been so afraid of making other people mad or uncomfortable around me. It starts out in your early 20s with getting over the fear of phone calls, calling for your own dentist appointment, sending food back at a restaurant for your first time, telling your boss no to something, setting down a boundary at work, negotiating for a raise. So in your 20s is the time that you're really practicing this independence, this level of adulting that is very empowering and has the ability to give you a much better quality of life if you harness it. This is also the time that you are no longer making decisions based on what other people around you think, but what you actually think. So one of the hardest examples of this for me was my marriage. I ended up going into a marriage that I think deep down inside I knew was not fully right for me. And I was so afraid of ending the relationship that I put myself in that position where I felt I had no other way out than forward. I did a lot of convincing of myself that this is actually what I wanted, this is actually what was right for me, even though I knew it wasn't fully aligned. And this is because at the time, I still had such a fear of letting other people down or wondering what everybody else would think. On a much lighter note, this is when you also have the freedom to experience things like developing a personal style, abandoning microtrends, no longer just chasing what the crowd thinks or what the crowd wants. This is when you start to make decisions based on what's actually aligned with you authentically. And not only is it very freeing, it's very fun. This might also be the time when people get to a crossroads about deciding hey, I want to postpone things like marriage and kids and buying a house. I want to move to a new city. I want to travel the world. This is a great time to experience things like that in your life. I like to call this the final boss of the 20s, choosing healthy partners. So this is when you stop letting people pick you. When looking into dating, you can start to identify the qualities that you want in a partner rather than what you believe is available. Letting go of checklists, timelines, perfection, but also knowing what you're not willing to compromise on and holding that line. Above all else, finally seeing yourself as the prize. That allows you to hold these standards and stick to them rather than compromising just because somebody likes you or is nice to you. I really do believe this is what allowed me to hack the online dating code as well. And I truly believe all of these lessons are what have led me to truly thrive in my 30s. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these do you struggle with the most?